Okay guys, so this is going to be the video for your first section of chapter 1. Alright, make sure when you're watching these that you're going through and you're taking notes. If you have to pause the video in order to write everything down, that's perfectly fine. Alright, but in class I'm going to check notes, not that you actually watch the video. Alright, so the first one is going to be super basic and you're going to know all of this stuff. Alright, it's just going to be a review. So first thing we're going to talk about is points. Alright, so a point simply marks a location. Alright, it's not good for anything other than that. Alright, it marks a location, and one thing you need to know about it is that you cannot measure it. Alright, so it has no size. All it does is it marks a certain spot on a grid or on a plane or anything like that. Alright, so when we look at what a point looks like, which you guys should know this because you've graphed them, alright, a point looks like that, it's just a dot. Okay, if I ask you to measure that dot, you can't. And then we have to look at, okay, well, how do we label it? All right, so it's always labeled with a capital letter. All right, you'll never see a point labeled with a lowercase. All right, and then when it asks you to name it, simply P. Or if you want to get fancy, you can put point P to be more specific. Okay, so simply knowing it marks a location and it has no size. Then we look at a line. All right, and we think, okay, well, what's the difference between a point and a line? A line has infinite points on it. Okay, so if I ask you how many points are on a line, you will always say an infinite amount. Okay, so a line is infinite points, and when we draw it, it's simply going to look like that. It's always going to have two arrows at the end. Okay, but then we have to think, okay, how do we name it? Whenever you have a point, or whenever you have a line, you have to make sure that you mark two of the points on it. If not, you can't name it. Right, now we know there are more points on that. Could have named them anything, all right? But you have to have two of them labeled. That way when we name it, we can name it AB, all right? And since it's a line, over top of it, that's what we're going to draw. We're just going to draw a line over top of it. Or again, you can do line AB. Next is a plane. All right, this is going to be the one that you probably haven't seen before. All right, and when we're talking about a plane, this again has, not only does it have infinite amount of points on it, okay, it also has an infinite amount of lines. When we draw this, it's going to look like this. Okay, and this is where it gets a little tricky. There are infinite amount of points, but in order to label it, you have to have 3 points. Okay, you always have to have 3. Because when you name this, what it's going to look like is you're going to make that little shape, and you're going to say ABC. Okay, or whatever points are in there. If I put a point out here that's not on the plane, I cannot use that to name it. So again, it has infinite amount of points, infinite amount of lines, and another thing, even though we don't draw little arrows out here, know that it goes on forever. Okay, so it goes on forever. It never ends. We just don't draw it like that. All right? So next we're going to talk about the different types of lines. All right? So first we've got line segments. That means that it has 2 endpoints. Okay, so a segment is a line with 2 endpoints. How we talked about up here, all right, a line was something that went on forever. If we have a segment, what that's going to look like is it's going to look like a line, but instead of the arrows, we're going to have points here, and it's going to be whatever those points are. Okay, and then when we name it, we're going to name it like that. Okay, notice the difference between this and labeling a line. We didn't put the arrows there because it does stop. It doesn't go on forever. Okay, now in between A and B, it still has an infinite amount of points. All right, so don't get confused and think, okay, well, there's only 2 points on this line. No, there's an infinite amount. There's just 2 end points, all right? End points, that's a specific part there. That's important. Okay, array is going to be similar. All right, so when we look at array, it looks like this. All right, so it's, again, since it's still a line, still infinite amount of points, but the difference between array and a segment is instead of having 2 endpoints, array only has 1 endpoint. Okay, and if it only has 1 endpoint, that means it goes forever, but only in one direction. Okay, so when we label this, We're going to use the 2 points that are labeled on it. All right, but I'm going to draw that little arrow over top. And that tells me that, okay, well at A, that's where my endpoint is. Okay, and then it goes on forever towards B. Make sure that's really important, okay? So I couldn't have labeled it like this, because if I did that, then I would have to have a line or a ray where the endpoint was B and the point that it went on forever towards was A. All right, so that direction is really important when you're naming it and when you're drawing it. Okay, an opposite ray, right? What that looks like is, you think opposite, right? So it's a line, just like that, goes on forever. But when I look at, okay, so opposite rays would be, yeah, I didn't even need that last point. Okay, so opposite rays would be AB and AC are opposite rays. Because if we look at AB, AB is going that direction forever, and AC has that same endpoint, okay? A is still the endpoint, but it's going the opposite direction, okay? So we look at the characteristics it has. An opposite ray has same endpoints, right? Okay, that endpoint has to be the same, all right? So these two letters right here have to be the same if you're talking about opposite rays. So it has the same endpoint, but it goes in opposite directions. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is an angle. So we talked about rays, and those are a line that goes forever in one direction, okay? And you guys know an angle, if I ask you to draw an angle, you're going to draw something like that, okay? But if we get more specific, this is just 2 rays, right? So if I label some points here, and I have A, I have B, and I have C, if I look at the breakdown, I can say, okay, well, AB is a ray, right? And AC is also a ray, and they're connected. So if we look at angles, angles are just 2 rays connected at the same endpoint. Okay, and that's every angle, right? Because this point right here is always going to be the same. So when we think about what an angle is 2 rays that are connected, and you always have to draw it like that. All right, and then we're going to talk about 2 other definitions that you need to know real quick, and this will be the last thing that we go over. All right, so we need to talk about collinear and coplanar. Okay, you'll see these on a few test questions. All right, all collinear means, if we think about what co means, all right, if we co-teach or we co-coach, what that means is we do it together, right? So that co part right there, that means together. And then we think about linear. Okay, well, co, that means together. And linear, that means line, right? So if we put those things together, together, line, right? So collinear is talking about 2 points or multiple points that lie on the same line. All right, so if I draw this, I would have a line. Okay, label some points, A, B, and C. I can say that points A, B, and C are collinear. Okay, simply means that they lie on the same line. Coplanar is going to be the same thing, all right? So it's going to be points, or, this is the difference, or lines that lie on the same plane. All right, so these are just 2 words that allow us to talk about where things are located and what they have in common, if they have any similarities. Okay, so collinear, coplanar, lie on the same line or lie on the same plane. So if I draw this real quick. All right, so if I have this, and I have X, Y, Z, and say out here I have W. Okay, I can say that X, Y, and Z are coplanar, right? But W is not, right? W isn't on the plane. If we label it outside, that means that it's outside of the plane. It's not in here. All right, so tomorrow we're going to be going over an activity where you will take all this and you'll put it all together and you'll see what you know. All right.